question of does the region have enough water? That's a big and worthwhile question. And that's the question we address. And so this region definitely has enough water. It's just about how to move it, how to store it, and where it has to come from in the future if it's not coming from the current locations. Because eventually you can imagine there might be places where the availability or accessibility of water is less than it once was because it's being developed. So in addition to the findings of that water resources are adequate and water supply is adequate, the other finding that we came to the conclusion of and reported in this document is that water utilities here need to work together in order to better serve and manage these areas of the state that might have local deficits. Collaboration, it isn't just a word that sounds good and kind of it isn't about that. It's about the coordinated activity of different utilities is really important just to manage the resource where it exists.
So, how do we best manage all of these moving parts? Regional collaboration is essential.
The first of these water availability studies was done in central Indiana because the community of utilities has already gathered together in this regional collaborative and they're having these conversations. So if there is a need for water, it's not just one utility thinking about it and worrying over it, it's multiple utilities together thinking about how to solve a problem that they share.
We got an initiative started through some discussions with some of these utilities to establish what's referred to as the Central Indiana Drinking Water Collaborative. This was really just set up as a forum initially for open discussion about some of these topics that were affecting all of the utilities.
What else is needed to manage the many parts? Investment in water availability. Investing in water availability means several things. Developing new groundwater sources. Just north of the planning region boundary, north of Boone County, there is a relatively unexplored aquifer, the Anderson Valley Aquifer, that could supply 10 to 20 million gallons per day from a properly designed well field. The forecasted increasing demands on the south side of Indianapolis could be sustainably met with new groundwater extraction along the West Fork White River in Morgan County. Investing in water availability also means managing stormwater infiltration.
Now, when it comes to the other water management, because it isn't just water supply, there are other water management components to the story of water. Well, stormwater management is actually critical to water supply as well. So managing how water gets back into the aquifer can change or improve or keep from going into a bad direction the water resources that are being used in an area.
Increasing stormwater infiltration is important to recharging groundwater supplies. In addition to storing more water in the ground, nearby quarries or other surface storage features can help increase water availability too. Another means of investing in water availability could include increasing local surface water storage by repurposing existing rock quarries. An example of this is the recently developed Citizens Reservoir, a 230-foot deep limestone aggregate quarry adjacent to Geist Reservoir that provides an additional 30 million gallons a day and is solely dedicated to water supply use. Finally, investing in water availability could also mean strategically using water from different sources and locations at different times of the year.
What we understand now to be really fundamentally linked, hydraulically linked, is really important for both water supply development and for water supply protection.
Extraction wells located near the riverbank actually pull water from the river itself, not the aquifer. This is called riverbank filtration, a technique that doesn't stress aquifers when water is abundant in the river. When base flow is lower, such as during hot and dry summers, wells further from the river can be used to pump the aquifer instead. This protects the in-stream flow and helps ensure there's adequate water for typical river withdrawals, as well as for wildlife and recreation.
Water management itself is complicated. It has a lot of parts. It has a kind of, we talked about stormwater management, we talked about wastewater, dealing with wastewater, and we talked about water resources being pulled from the ground or from the river or from reservoirs. All those different pieces of the puzzle are the supply. There's another story, and that is the demand is the other half of that. If we understand how to modulate or affect the demand that we put on the resource or the demand that we all put on our utilities, we can change the story just by altering the way we use water. And so conservation really is the demand side of the puzzle of water management.
Another way is through conservation, demand management.
The fact is we use a lot more water in the summertime, but during peak periods when everyone is using water for that purpose, there can be huge spikes in demand that are really up to us as the consumers of water to manage. So on the demand side, it's not up to the utility. It's the non-utility part of water management. It's the personal part. And that's where the community has to really kind of come together and respond to requests for conservation, the reduction in use. All of us in this community that we live here and we go about our business and we aren't paying attention and we just use more water as the seasons demand, as the seasons require. A bunch of water is being needed for like an hour and a half in a part of the day. And all the storage tanks that are in a community are really there just to add water because it can't be produced at the treatment plant fast enough to add water to the system of treated water to take care of those daily peaks in need. You've got these peaks on either side, and we have built infrastructure just to manage and take care of and supply that need.
In the summertime, in the hot months, Carmel has 13,000 to 14,000 automatic irrigation systems now. The bulk of them will run 1, 2 o'clock in the morning all the way to 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. We will go from an average of putting out maybe 4,000 to 5,000 gallons per minute to we'll exceed 30,000 gallons per minute going out of our treatment plants at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's not to fight a fire. That is for automatic irrigation.
After the drought in 2012, it did point out some of the tight points in the process. We did end up having to issue a lawn watering restriction for a time period during that time. So it really was a wake-up call on more detailed look at our overall water supply and planning picture.
So there are daily peaks, there are seasonal changes, and then from year to year there are changes. The infrastructure cost that we all pay is really tied to the top number that we have to produce and deliver to ourselves. And that is really the key to looking at costs and dealing with the costs of infrastructure. As we bring our peaks down, we'll be able to manage the price and the costs as well. So we've got this kind of relationship with peak demand. It's kind of a freedom to not worry about it, but it's really not without cost. We have to pay for that.
And finally, we can also invest in continued and additional monitoring.
The most important thing that I believe came out of this report and this work was that we were able to document with data, not with our own notions or our judgments, but with the data that exists, that there is adequate supplies for the growth of this part of the state into the future. By saying that there's an adequate supply of water here is necessary but not sufficient. One of the things that is critical to management is to understand what the effect of your management is having on the thing of interest, in this case, water. How does stormwater affect groundwater? That's a good question. How does stormwater management and kind of recharging it locally, how does that affect the flows in the river? So that's an important question as well. So how does this change in how we manage one piece of the system affect all the other pieces of the system? Stream flows, water levels in the aquifer. The only way that we can answer those questions, besides building a model that is a kind of idealized version of the systems, is to actually measure. And we don't have that many measurements. We have a couple hundred data points for stream flows in our whole state. But the density that's needed is probably an order of magnitude, at least higher. We can't draw conclusions with that data, but to understand how our management strategies are affecting the resource, we need to have 10s and 20s and 30 data points for water levels in aquifers, stream flows, etc., so that we can really see the effect of our management. We had to pull from various agencies, we had to pull from state and federal agencies to make the report whole. And so we need to better manage the data after it's collected, but we really need an overview, a kind of a single way to look at the resource. And that's what's been, I think, missing. Our water is locally recharged, and actually from a groundwater perspective, it's all pretty young. It's less than a century, pretty much. So groundwater is being refilled annually by the recharge that occurs. We can control and manage all of that if we have enough data, and we don't. So that's important. We need to supplement the data that we have in order to really manage the resource into the future. We have to invest in ourselves. Most other states of our size are pouring tens of millions of dollars into this because it is the first question that comes up when a new company is deciding whether to move into an area. Is their first question, not their third or their sixth or anything. The first question is there adequate water? Our economy has to be able to respond to the needs, and the needs now are related to water. It's not enough to have enough water because we could ruin it, or we could fight over it, or we could in some other way tangle ourselves in our own imagined, rights for the water. But instead, the only way that this will work, that our adequate supplies will in fact be enough for the community, is if the communities coordinate and collaborate as they grow.